Morning, church. So my background's in animation, storytelling, so I'm going to tell you a story. It's interesting when you talk about men because I grew up without one. My dad passed away when I was 2. My mother was a dancer, and my dad, when he first met her, was in a nightclub, and he told everyone that he wanted her to be his wife, and he would fight everyone to get her hand. I just can't imagine these poor guys sitting there in their chair getting a fist in their hand because my dad had to prove to my mom that he was a tough man. And that's when tough men were men back in that day. Rugged men. Dad fought in Korean War, and he was tough, um, but he died, leaving my mom and my grandmother to raise 3 boys. I was the youngest, the handsomest. My older brother Marty, he was an atheist. He was 6'2" when he got bigger. Everyone would pick on him because my dad played football, and they all thought he should be a football player, and he wasn't. He was into his books and everything. So when the kids picked on him, he just raised his fist at God and said, "No reason for me to believe in you." Uh, my middle brother, he's a pacifist. He was more new age, I would think, than anything you would classify him as. Uh, he just he was just kind of calm, and he was 6'6", and everyone thought he was a tough guy because he's tall. Nothing like the sort. And then there was me, and I was the energized one who caused all the trouble. So I had 3 boys, and my grandmother was raising me, and my mother was raising me. So my mom quit show dancing and took a job, and 3 boys just trying to get by. One was in church, Baptist, Catholic church. There was no in between. So I walk in there in the big cathedral, and it's a huge church, and it's like, wow. But I had no real feeling. It was just I was too overwhelmed by the architect to really, feel anything else. So time passed, and I would go to church once in a while, and no men in my life. My neighbor, though, I got friends with, were and the father would take me and his son, and then he would go to the horse to bed. But it was like a father file. And my grandma and my mom moved us up into mountains. That was a whole different environment because it was more of back in the valley. I had more of a reputation because I would beat up the kids that beat my brothers up. But up there, I didn't have a reputation, and it was just kind of solemn. So I leaned more into reading and doing comic books and stuff like that. Uh, my brother, my middle brother, joined the army, and he moved away, and then I followed. I joined the Navy. My older brother stayed. Had issues with my older brother, mental issues. He was taking drugs to control him. To backpedal a little bit, when he was younger, my mom not having a man to tell her, to help her figure out, a husband figure it out, they put my brother into a special needs class for mentally retarded kids. And my brother was actually quite opposite. The reason he wasn't paying attention in class was he was quite smart. He was actually brilliant. But when he was put in this class, it changed him. And he even got more hostile. He had anger issues growing up. So he was not really open to anything spiritual. One of his friends was from the Mormons. They tried to recruit him, and he blew it. He just didn't want anything to do with it. My mom, her religious background was, my grandmother was Roman Catholic. My grandfather was Church of England. They couldn't agree on what church to baptize her with, so they just said, "We're not going to baptize you." My mom decided, well, you know what? I will live a good life. I'm a good person. God will let me into heaven. Kind of sad, actually. So got older, moved to California. I'm sorry, I said too much. So I joined the service and I got baptized Catholic, which I went to church one time and they told me what to do and everything. So as I was going off to the ship overseas, why don't we baptize you first? So I was like, oh, okay, sound cool. I didn't know what it meant. So I was on a spiritual journey this whole time as well because things didn't seem clear to me. I don't everything in the physical never seemed clear to me. I go to high school and go to learn about science, and you're like, well, that makes sense to some point. There has to be something beyond that. And then you like really research it, and you start finding these holes in science in itself, and you're like, this doesn't make sense at all. So, so on the ship, I'm going, and we first place I stop is Italy, and we walk into once again these big cathedrals, and it's like, wow, these are great. And talk about the buildings sinking in the water, and they're trying to rebuild them to save this art and all this, and restructure these pieces of art. And I'm just like, but there's no talk of anything but art, no God, just art. And that kind of turned me off. And that's one thing you can say about the Bible. It's like the Bible's been here forever. Civilizations have fallen, and the Bible still remains. So we went to a few other trips. Went to UK and places like that, and then I went to Jerusalem, Israel, and there I really had my spiritual eyes open, as you could say. There I felt the presence of pain, suffering, and joy. I couldn't figure out what this joy was, and then I just felt the presence of God. And then I started reading the Bible, but as life continued, I kind of like put it down. And then, I'm just sitting on my bed and I'm getting ready to leave the service. I'm just like, I just don't know what to do. So I decided to go to Las Vegas. So I drive out to Las Vegas and I get a job in casinos doing surveillance work, which is a really cool job. You got all these monitors around you and, get to look at people, and like for me, it's like in the comic books, you had this guy named Dr. Doom who was looking at all his villains. I always felt like that. It's like seeing the monitors and you go look at all these people and stuff, it was really cool. And then like I met someone there that was just like blew my brain out. I don't know what you could say. I met this person who was just like she was beautiful and sweet, and I mean, there's a lot of beautiful people in Las Vegas, but to be one that's really grounded and honest and stuff, and right. So I started asking this girl out, and we've been through a lot of stuff, but I married that girl. She's been the sweetest thing I've ever laid eyes on. Sorry. As you know, I'm not used to talking in front of people. Usually behind the camera, not in front of it. So anyway, so I got together with Don, and we just we were inseparable. We couldn't go anywhere without each other. And first thing we did was, Don said, Don loved music. I mean, Don would love concerts. She would take me to this concert, this concert. Growing up, I wasn't into music. I was into show music because my mother was into stuff like that. So Don would take me to all these concerts. And then one day she took me to a Carmen concert. I was like, who's Carmen? I literally, who's Carmen? So we go there and listening to this thing about Satan, about the music, and about all this, and it's like really touches your heart. It's like spirit talking to you, going, "Wow, this stuff is true," you know. So Don and I went to an altar call down there. Talked to we talked to him, right? Or you talked? I knew you were talking to someone. Anyway, So we just, we started going to church after that because it touched us so much. But in Las Vegas, we couldn't really find, because with me, the only church I knew was a Catholic church, and that was like I said, it's just to me too, out of touch. But then Don and me started going to these other churches, which was really funny because they all had their different things about them. And it's funny when you take your wife who just gets pregnant to a church, and they were making us stand up and step down, and step up, step down on the chair for the music and for the words. And Don's like, if he makes me stand up one more time. So, so I'm sitting at my, I'm sitting doing this work in Las Vegas. Dawn hated Las Vegas. She grew up there. She knew what type of things went on there, and she just wanted something better. And so I just sat on my bed and just saying, how, what am I doing wrong every day to make my life so miserable? You know, what am I doing that's causing me so much pain? Because I had a beautiful wife, I had a beautiful life as far as I know. I had a good job and everything, but there was something missing, you know. And once you ask that question, you got to wait for an answer. You got to say, well, what is it? What is it? You know. And so as we're waiting, I get a phone call from California, and I was talked by a recruiter for Disney, and he said I was chosen. There was 8 people chosen out of like a few million people, and the one person that was in the program decided they were going to get pregnant and not be able to go. So I got in there and started a whole new life with us. We moved down there. It's like, oh, we're gonna make bunches of money and live the high life, and you know that wasn't the case. They didn't tell us that they lay people off from project to project. And so we're like, really? It's like when you try to, you're almost getting ahead and you think you're going to pay all your bills and get them all done. And then, oh, we've got to lay you off. Yep. And it happened. I mean, I've worked for some of the best studios in the world, and they all do it. But so we both had to get jobs and everything. But at that time, we went to a church and we got baptized there, following God. And we had our struggles. Like, everyone thinks when you get saved, what the doors open up, everything's gonna be perfect, you're gonna be living in harmony with God, and that wasn't the case. It wasn't the case at all. And then to pour, salt in the wound, not that it was bad, but we had Krista during this time, you know, and we went into hospital and we're like, we have this baby, because Don and me wanted to have a sister for Tyler. So Tyler was a perfect child. Tyler was like grace and smart and everything you could want from a child. Tyler was. Then we got Krista, and they diagnosed Krista with spina bifida, and every weirdo in the hospital came out saying, "You've got to have an abortion. You've got to have an abortion." Well, the church we were going to, we had a lady who introduced us to a lady who had a spina bifida child. It was living great and God-fearing people. I mean, it's like, I think a lot of that is fear. A lot of people fear. My cousin did the same thing. He wanted to abort his child who had Down syndrome because the doctor said 98% this kid had Down syndrome. Took the shot, everything, all the X-rays, and the wife wouldn't let her do it. Her name's Nancy, and the baby was born, and not one thing was wrong with it. So I knew right then that doctors were full of it. He was French. So we had Krista, and she was the most bundle of joy we could ever have. I remember feeding her at the table, and we would feed her at the table, and we would give her the baby food, spoon at a time. Then we'd turn around for a second. Don would say something. We'd turn around, and Krista would have taken her glasses and put them upside down. Then she would put the spoon on her nose. She was a perfect child as well. Yeah, she was perfect. I mean, she would just crack herself up. You could just watch a child just stare at her, and she'd just start laughing at things. And then Don got a person from our church at the time got a dream that we would have a child that would walk, that was sick, but she would walk one day. And we went to the pastor because the pastor was pregnant at the same time Don was, and thought it was his child. And it wasn't his child. He said, "I think I know who you're talking about." So we've held on to that dream for our, to the day. We're still dreaming about that. So I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time. So we'll go a little bit further. So start going to another church because the other church we left that. Uh, we went to a different church, and we still had the feeling that something was going on. So we got confirmation from the pastor and my wife of a verse that took us out here to Texas. So here we go to Texas and waiting for a whole different world. Thought things were going to be so much better. I would be given this ultimate job, and that didn't work out either. We were struggling. We were struggling big time because there's not a lot of demand at the time for artists out from California into Texas. I mean, there was just not a big entertainment industry like there is now. I mean, now I could have done it, but back then doors were shut. So we got like you know retail jobs and things like that to get by. You know, but God was there. I mean, we would when our church came here, we would break it down and set it up every Sunday at the YMCA. You know, but and the thing was with me are under attack big time. You know, and it's like what would this world do without men? I'm sorry, women are great. Women have their place. I highly support anyone when you get married to the perfect female. I did. But it's like we build things, we do things, we create things, and to say as it is, it's a shame. But I'm so I it showed me, the responsibility of men is one, be responsible. Taking your life responsible. You know, And so we endured that. We strive to do. I strive to do, not Dawn because she's a woman, but I strive to do that. um, so I got built. I built my foundations through that. It's like Nietzsche said. If you know the why, you know the why. So whatever you go through, whatever it is, you can bear it because you know Western civilization. The pains and things that we go through. Christ bared his sins, our sins. He lifted that cross up. Yeah. So we're supposed to follow Christ. So we need to lift our cross up when we have things that are too hard to bear. Loads that are too big to carry. You know. And I wish I was the end of the story. I wish could just tell you I was just like this great guy that just followed God all the time. But I have my challenges. And a lot of times it was lip service. It's like I was just trying to tell God. I was telling God what I was going to do before I was asking him what I was going to do. And then, as you know, the big thing happened when Krista. Krista built me. It changed my faith totally, and it gave me a closer relationship with God. There's nothing like when you're rushing your daughter to the emergency room to feel her body go limp. And sometimes you have to fall on your knees so you can be raised up by God. And I had a different experience in a lot of sense because it drew me closer to God. I actually felt God more than I've ever had before. And he gave us messengers through the sorrow as well. I remember the doctor said there was no way she was going to be back normal. I remember that day he walked in and we had the top neurologist in the country, um, here in Texas, and he said, I want to be your biggest cheerleader, but I got to tell you, the damage she has sustained, she's not going to wake up. There's no chance of it. And that very day, they were putting a trach in her throat. And they're telling me, my wife, about all these benefits they could give us. And the girl stopped the other girl from talking. Said, they're not even understanding what you're saying. There's things wrong with them. They're got too much on their plate. So they moved us from the ICU down to a room, and we're just staying there. And out of courtesy, I think it was called, they brought this physical therapist down to us, see if they could do anything. And he had this. Don was there, and they had this big table, like a table, a chair, like a wheelchair table. They call it. What's this? Yeah, something like that. And he was just going to go through the exercises and everything. But he turned out to be a Christian man and didn't believe those kind of rules those doctors were setting down. And he flipped Krista up like this. My wife's like, oh, I thought she was going to fall out of it. And he looked in her eyes and he says, there's light still there. He's the only one that gave us hope at that time. And we were still depressed. We were like, maybe he's just being nice. A week later, the nurse had asked me to help move Krista from one bed to the next. So what they do, they lay a sheet down from one bed, and you grab that sheet and you pull it over to another bed. That's how they transfer people. So mind you, Krista had no movement whatsoever for a month or two. So as we're lifting her and putting her into the other bed, this child who was lifeless, all of a sudden the nurse let her side down, and Krista's arm went like this and grabbed the other side of the bed. Yeah. The nurse turned white. She was like, oh, she couldn't believe it. So I went into the bathroom and prayed to God, because nurses didn't like me wandering around praying to God because it's a hospital. But then as I was walking, I had this vision, and it was a vision. I had a vision of me and Jesus sitting on a fence. And on the fence, we overlooked Elijah. And he was having the priest throwing water on the log, and they were light on fire. And Jesus said to me, they're going to do that to you, but you keep faith. Amen. Yeah. I never had a vision like that. It was incredible. I had a vision close to that earlier when I was going to marry Dawn. I had a vision of who I was going to marry, and it was her. God gave me that. But this was different than that. So the very next day, they called us in the big room, and we had the best medical physicians in Texas. And they all sat around and said, you guys are in unbelief. This is not going to happen. You're going to have to get a room, and you're going to have to raise her, visit her every month. But God had a bigger plan. So they were going to send her home, but after Krista's arm went down like that, they tried a bunch of drugs on her. Drugs that were just making her even not being awake, just trying to wake her up. But she finally did open her eyes, but there was nothing there. So this girl, Rocky, had a, what do you call it, rehabilitation center, excuse me. They said, the doctor said, don't put her there. She's not responding whatsoever. But Rocky had faith. Rocky said, yeah, let's bring her in. So we're doing all this stuff, giving her drugs, and she started waking up. A little at a time, to where she had consciousness, which they said was impossible. And I believe the reason Krista was a fighter is because my wife was a fighter. Krista was fighting for her life. She knew she had to come out. And none of the doctors there wanted to help. We were just a number. But then we got a therapist there, a respiratory therapist, who said, you know what? Do this. Because she's there. They just don't see it. So they sent us home thinking, nothing. They thought we were going to yank the trach out and all this stuff. And it's just like, no, we're waiting on God. God's going to do something. Because in the hospital, God said He's going to heal her 110%. 110%. Little to say, little at a time, she kept waking up more and more. And then she was fully conscious. And it was hard to see her. She was just not the child I had. Before, Krista was very uh, social. She would go to people and, raise her hands up and talk to them and speak to them and know how they want to be. And now she was not like that. She said, "Daddy, I'm a monster. I can't. I'm not." I said, "Krista, Krista, let God work in you. You got to heal a little bit at a time." So God was talking to us daily. My faith grew stronger and stronger. And then when they when we went to rehabilitation center, we just took Krista home. All of them took the bad news. Well, she woke up a little bit, but doesn't mean she's there. She's not, she just seems there. She's not there. So I remember when we made our first visit, she's in the chair, and you used to have to carry all this stuff for the trach in case it went out and everything. And before that, we had like 30 ambulance visits in like a month, because every time something would go off, and the nurses there, there was a different type of people there. we One of the dangerous things you could do, I think, in home care is a pick. Norma, you probably agree that picks. Yeah. So the nurse and me are going to do a pick, and she never had done one before. So she called the main lady in to do it. And the night before, a week before, Krista had a kidney infection, so I asked how to do it. So I go in there, and Krista has to his pick, and the lady goes, "You do this, this, and this," and she starts doing it. She goes, "Oh, I got to leave," and she left. So I had to do it myself. So I'm like praying to God. I'm like, "God, this is like overwhelming." So I think God decided, yeah, it's time. So all that water Elijah threw in my vision was everyone who doubted God. We had a nurse who went to our church at the time, came in, thought she would give us a cheer up, and said, "You know what? You guys are Christians, you love God, but you got to come reality. Krista is not getting better." I'm like, "Okay, there's the door. You can walk right out of it." Because when you go in a hospital, everyone knows what the worst outcome is going to be. The worst outcome is that, but we don't hold on to that worst outcome. We hold on to hope that God's given us, and we don't pray in fear. There's no fear in love. You pray in love, and God's will be done. And God said it's not her time, even though all the neurologists, all the surgeons, everyone there said it's her time. God said no, it is not. So we went to this neurologist, and he's like, "Okay, you guys, she's awake, but she's not awake. She's just there." He goes, "Let me show you." And he rolls up his sleeves and show him. He goes to her, "What is this?" She goes, "Your watch." And he's like, "That's not supposed to happen. That means you're thinking." He goes, "Okay, my shoes. What color are my shoes?" She goes, "Black." And he's like, "Oh no." So he goes, grabs his typewriter or his computer. He starts typing. He goes, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm typing this up." He told me that this is incredible. He goes, "This is not supposed to happen." They did X-rays to look at the damage in her brain, and it's like so severe that there is no possible way a adult could come back from this. But he said, watching her get better, doing this big outcome, because there's only one way he can explain it, that God is real.
Yes.
Yeah. We went back to the guy who put the trach in. And he was on the same path. We go there, and he comes down to see her. He goes, "Okay, look, I can't take the trach out. She doesn't have consciousness. She doesn't know what she's doing." And as he's talking about that, I look at Krista, and Krista looks at me, and I look back at him, and Krista looks back at him, and Krista goes, "Take this thing out of me."
Yeah.
And the doctor's like, "I don't know whether to be mad or I just full of joy right now, because that's never happened." Because God is in control. When we see things that don't look like they can work, God turns it around. So the neurologist came to us and said, you know what? I have been in this industry for 40 some years. I have never seen a child go through the damage that Krista has to ever come back again. He says, I now have hope to tell other children, other parents, what has happened. But God has, when we talk miracles, Krista is a God miracle. There is no reason on earth. And when I say the best doctors, they were calling other doctors throughout the world trying to figure out what was wrong with this child. And my wife gets mad at me for this one point. They put a shunt in her head, and there's a 99.9% failure. It won't fail. They test them before they put them in your head. So they did that twice to her. Both failed at the same time. So I believe Satan had turned this on Krista. There's something in Krista's life that she's going to do so powerful that he wanted to take her out. But God turned it around. God used that opportunity to grow birth faith in Krista. And I tell you right now, the devil's going to wish he did take her out because she's going to become a powerful instrument for God. Now, my family right now is a little busted up. But I have that faith God will put it back together because I have seen his hand do miraculous things. You know? But, through it all, my wife's been at my side. We've been fighting it tooth and nail. And I stand before you not the man I was, but the man I hope to be. Because I have potential, God says. Potential. I'm going to turn that potential and live my life to that potential. and that's really what it's about, is potential. We're all a thing of potential that God shapes. Like Pastor said in his sermon last week, we're just a pot that God changes, that forms and moves. And some of that stuff hurts. Some of that stuff hurts so bad. I remember when my mom was passing away, my daughter was in my hands, and I'm looking at my mom, who's on a tray self, and we walked in, and the woman that she was and the woman she is now, and she, like my older brother, still refused to accept God. There's so many lost that we're not touching that are just in a cloud, and we have to be that vessel to touch them. If you know one or two people, just keep them in your prayers and pray for them. Right now we're having an issue with some people we're praying for. It's like it comes to a point where it's like, this is all I'm doing, Lord. You've got to come and do. You've got to come and help in this situation. And God says, I'm already doing that. That's why you're there. I'm pushing you, and I'll push more people. So, yeah. So enough said. I thank you for your time. Good. Thank you.